Hello and welcome to our presentation of our latest investigation on the virtual ISIS Prisons Museum website. My name is Dagmar. I do communication here at the Prisons Museum, and I will give you just a short overview of what we're going to do. I will introduce you a little bit more to the organization. Then Robin, our head English editor and head of investigation, will give you context and explain the scope of the latest investigation on the Al Shaitat massacre. And then Noor and Monzer, who are both from our 3D team, will show you the tours that we built from the investigation and how you can look at the reconstructions of the crimes that happened. So the ISIS Prisons Museum, what is it? It's an organization whose idea began in 2017 through the work of the Al Shara Media Foundation, which is a Syrian NGO. And that has been active in Syria since 2010 as a collective of journalists, photographers, and documentary filmmakers and artists. And this group dedicated itself to providing investigative and documentary coverage of Syria during the 2011 revolution and the years after of war and the displacement of Syrians. So in 2017, when ISIS had been driven out, they were able to look at the prison sites of ISIS in the search for colleagues that had been disappeared and in the search for family members. And what they found were traces of ISIS in those traces of the prisoners, and they began to document them. And this documentation grew over time into a collection of over 100 sites. There were documents found by ISIS, so 70,000 documents total are now in the archive. And then they began talking to people who had experienced the prison time in ISIS and became witnesses to what happened on these sites, a third source for us to reconstruct what happened. And so by now we have over 500 witness testimonies in our archive. In October of last year, the ISIS Prison Museum website went online. It's live now for everybody to see. And a month later, we had our first physical exhibition at the UNESCO headquarters, where people were able to experience the 3D worlds that we built for memorialized purposes at the UNESCO headquarters on the example of what happened to the city of Old Mosul during ISIS times. And then in December, in the short history of the Prisons Museum itself, the Syrian regime fell, and we have been busy ever since to apply the same methodology we used to uncover and document ISIS crimes in the Syrian prisons, where we are also now active documenting and preserving the traces of what has happened there. But now today we're really talking about the latest investigation, the third of the ISIS Prisons Museum on the Al Shaitat massacre. And I'll leave it over to Robin to give you an introduction. Robin, you can take over now.
Okay, I'll click OK, so I'm not bothered by that. Every so often, every 6 weeks or 2 months, the Prisons Museum, the ISIS Prisons Museum, is coming up with a new special investigation. And the latest one is a special investigation into the Shaitat massacre. And I hope that you will all, after this, if you haven't already, go and have a look at the website and see what we've got. There's lots of material there. We've got, for example, to start with, I wrote a text putting this massacre into context, because of course it comes in the context of a string of massacres perpetrated over the decades by the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq, by the Assad regime in Syria, by various actors during the Iraqi civil war, including Shia militias, the Americans themselves, and ISIS. We've got lots of witness testimony, audio and video, both with former prisoners in Shaitat, in prisons set up by ISIS in the Shaitat villages and towns, and with relatives, female relatives, mothers and wives of the victims. We've got sample documents which are relevant to which ISIS left behind, which are relevant to their repression of the Shaitat clan. We've got a timeline of the massacre. We've got 2 special investigations into 2 of the dozens of prisons which ISIS established in the homes of Shaitat Klansmen, in which they tortured and detained and in many cases killed Shaitat Klansmen. Noor, who we'll talk in a moment, did those special investigations. And as usual, as is our usual way, we've got 3D tours of 3 of these prisons. And then we've got the main special report or investigation called the Shaitat Massacre, documenting the events and reshaping the narrative. This was done by Sasha and Ayman Al-Alu. Sasha is here with us today. He prefers to speak Arabic, but he is available to answer questions. So if at the end you have questions, if I can't answer them or Noor can't answer them, we can translate them for Sasha, who can respond. And I must say, I'm allowed to say this because it's not my own work. I must say this is a really remarkably detailed, in-depth report, which is really very, very useful. I consider myself to be something of an expert on Syria and the last 15 years in Syria, but I really didn't have much of a detailed picture before I read this report. I edited it, so I read it in depth, but before I read this report, I didn't have much of a detailed picture of precisely how it had happened. I knew that the Shaitat were a clan, a subdivision of the Aqidat tribe, and that they had some kind of conflict with ISIS, and as a result, ISIS killed a lot of them. But I didn't know how that happened, precisely why that happened, and so on. And this report, it's a very detailed report which gives you all of the background and all of the details. The Shaitat massacre in August 2014 was the worst ISIS atrocity in Syria. We can perhaps say that they did worse things in Iraq. There were bigger massacres in Iraq, but in Syria, it was by far the worst massacre perpetrated by ISIS. It was the second worst massacre in Syria during the war, which started in 2011. The worst, of course, was the Assad regime's sarin atrocity in the Ghouta suburbs of Damascus. And it's the third worst massacre in Syria in modern times since the Mongol invasions. The worst was 1982 in the city of Hama, when the Assad regime killed between 20 and 40,000 people. Sasha and Ayman, in their report, they describe it as a massacre with genocidal characteristics. Now, you know, the definition of genocide is always disputed. It's a bit difficult. Usually we think of genocide, if we look at the ISIS genocide of the Yazidis, we can say that's definitely a genocide, because the Yazidis were a different sectarian ethnic group to the leadership of ISIS. ISIS was led by Sunni Arabs, and the Yazidis are not Sunni Muslims and they're not Arabs. So I think we can all agree that that is a genocide, whereas the Shaitat clan are Sunni Arabs. They share the same religion, the same sectarian identity, and the same ethnic identity as ISIS and the leadership of ISIS. Nevertheless, we can call it genocidal, or a massacre with genocidal characteristics, because there was a definite desire to destroy the Shaitat as a community, as a group. There was a specific intention, and there was a specific order issued in the form of a fatwa, which I will come to. So the massacre, it was actually a series of massacres. It wasn't one event, it was a series of many events. And it was centered around the 3 villages, or actually 2 villages and 1 town officially, in which the Shaitat live in the east of Deir ez-Zor province in Syria. These places are called Abu Hammam, Kishkiye, and Gharanij. And they were the last parts of Deir ez-Zor province to fall under ISIS control. They resisted the longest, which I think is what made ISIS not very happy with the Shaitat to start with. The report begins by giving a lot of military and political context about what was happening in the area, in Deir ez-Zor province, from the point that the Assad regime started losing territory from 2012 on. The Assad regime kept hold of military bases, certain big military bases like the Deir ez-Zor air base, for example, in the province, all the way until December the 8th last year. But most of the territory and the vast majority of the population was out of Assad regime control. So who controlled it? Firstly, Free Syrian Army militias, non-ideological militias, which comprised defectors from the regime's army and armed civilians who originally picked up arms to defend their communities. And there was a whole, there were dozens of these militias, and the report goes into a lot of detail describing who they were. And then there are two Salafi jihadist organizations which are well known today, Ahrar al-Sham and Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra, of course, eventually turned into HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is now the de facto authority in Syria after a lot of political and ideological changes which we're trying to pin down. We can't quite work out who these people are today. But certainly back then, Jabhat al-Nusra was Al-Qaeda. It was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or the Islamic State in Iraq, as it branded itself. On April the 9th, 2013, ISIS announced its existence. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced that this is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and Jabhat al-Nusra is a wing or is part of ISIS. And then the leadership of Jabhat al-Nusra said, wait a minute, no, we're not. We're doing our own thing. And at this point, there was the big split between the two organizations, or they became two organizations. In parts of Syria, that led immediately to fighting between the two. In Deir ez-Zor, it didn't immediately lead to fighting. In general, what happened in Deir ez-Zor was that Jabhat al-Nusra just kind of left. Some people defected, or some people became ISIS. Elsewhere, Nusra just left. But there was over a year of fighting as ISIS tried to subdue all the other armed forces in the province. These battles were definitely ideological, but they were also tribal. They represented conflicts between tribes and clans, and they were very much financial. They were about controlling oil fields in particular, which of course provided a very important source of income for these groups. The more income that they had, the more men they could recruit, the more weapons they could buy, and the more power they could accumulate. So they were fighting over oil fields such as the Conoco and Jafra oil fields and the Omar and Tanak oil fields, which are in the Shaitat areas. These battles went on for over a year, and at least 7,000 people were killed, both fighters and civilians, in these battles, and hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. ISIS took, of course, I've missed out that on June the 10th, 2014, ISIS took control of Mosul in northern Iraq and vast swathes of northern Iraq. And suddenly it became a much more important and powerful organization in Syria too. It had reinforcements. Lots of men were pouring across the border from Iraq to join the fighters in Syria. It had a huge morale boost, and it had a lot more money and weapons which had been captured in Iraq. So that really was the crucial thing which kind of sealed the fate of Deir ez-Zor province. After that, it was a matter of time before ISIS controlled the whole province and lots of other parts of Syria too. On July the 8th, 2014, ISIS took control of the final areas, the Shaitat areas in Deir ez-Zor province, and the Shaitat were forced to, they had no other option than to sign an agreement with with ISIS. Now, this agreement stated that there would be no ISIS bases in Shaitat towns. This was what the Shaitat negotiated, that okay, you can take control of the area, but you won't build bases inside our villages and towns. Also, you will give us, the Shaitat, you will give our men work opportunities in the oil fields in the area which you now control. In return, there was an agreement that the Shaitat would hand over their weapons to ISIS, and that ISIS would have full control of the area, and also repentance, which is a term which they often used, ISIS, even with the people that they arrested for smoking cigarettes and such things. People had to sign repentance documents saying that they're sorry, that they recognize that ISIS's rule is the same as God's rule and they're not going to contravene it again. So this agreement didn't last for very long. By July the 30th, on July the 30th, the agreement was breached. It was breached first because ISIS did build military bases inside the Shaitat villages. It also set up it set up a military base in the municipality building, the town hall in Kishkia, and it also set up a checkpoint on the road, which started arresting people and harassing people for smoking cigarettes and such like. ISIS also raided the Nahab family home in Abu Hammam. They killed somebody there, somebody called Hamdan al-Alian. And then a neighbor, Muhammad al-Faraj, came out of the house to see what was going on and started complaining about what ISIS was doing. And they killed him. They mutilated his corpse and paraded it in the marketplace. So the Shaitat immediately said, okay, the agreement has been breached. So they set up a militia, a group of men gathered and set up an impromptu militia. They attacked an ISIS vehicle, and then they attacked the base in the municipality building. They killed 2 ISIS fighters there, and they captured 3. And from this moment on, the 12-day battle, a series of battles over 12 days kicked off, in which the Shaitat were trying to push ISIS out of their area, and ISIS was trying to recapture it. On July the 30th, on the same day, the massacre began, not just people being killed in fighting, but an actual massacre of civilians too, and unarmed people. 26 oil employees at one of the oil fields were killed on that day. And this was the first of a series of massacres in which people were killed, often by having their throats cut. Sometimes they were burnt, often they were shot. There was arbitrary detention, people detained and then executed in detention. There was the forced displacement of people from the villages. There was looting and the destruction of homes and other property. A lot of foreign fighters were involved on ISIS, in the ISIS side, including the Batar Battalion, which Noor, I'm sure, will talk about a bit more in a moment. The Batar Battalion was originally set up in Syria by Libyans, and then after a few months of its foundation, it joined ISIS and it became a kind of special commando group. It was known for its brutality. They used to fight barefoot, at least that was the propaganda, that they fought barefoot because they were so fierce. There were Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Chechens also fighting. And in this Batar Battalion, specifically, there were North Africans, Libyans, Tunisians, and French citizens of North African origin. Let me talk a little bit about that fatwa that I mentioned earlier. I've got to go quickly, very quickly. The fatwa was by a character called Abu Abdullah al-Kuwaiti from Kuwait, according to his name. And he described the Shaitat as mutineers against the rule of Sharia, an apostate group. And he said it is permissible to kill those of them who are detained. It is permissible to kill the fleeing and wounded. And it's that which justified the massacres. This was passed around by word of mouth amongst the fighters, and they took this as justification. As you all know, very often ISIS considered disloyalty to its organization as disloyalty to God. They very directly. So those people who didn't obey ISIS were guilty of disobeying God, and according to ISIS, it was justified to kill them. And there's more to say, but I'll shut up because I've gone on too long. And I'll hand over to Dagmar, who can hand over to Noor.
Yes, I was actually going to hand over to Noor directly, Noor, who will be supported by Monzer, to now show how we actually did this extensive research on a stretched out atrocity and turned it into 3D tours and 3D remodeling of the sites of these crimes. Noor, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Dagmar and Robin. I am Noor, a journalist, and I am a 3D assistant in this project. And we have also with us like Monzer, who is the architecture, and he is the designer of the 3D tour. Monzer, can you show us Al-Battar prison? So in this investigation, we mainly have 3 prisons that we studied in depth, and we built 3 tours. And this is the first one. As Robin said, we have Al-Battar Battalion, and they took over this house and they stayed in it, and they turned it also as a prison. In order to understand these 3 prisons, by the way, there was maybe dozens of prisons in the villages of Deir ez-Zor during that time, but we only studied three of them. And this one was interesting for us because Al-Battar Battalion was staying, or they took over this house and they turned it into prison. Since it was during the battles with Al-Shaitat, so it was like war time. So we didn't see in this house a lot of changes that we see in other prisons. Like normally we see them.
Maybe just for everybody to understand, what we're seeing now is the house after the battalion left years later in 2021, right? So this is
we documented, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We documented this house in 2021. And so this house, we, in general, in our museum, we tried to build and understand every 3D tour based on our testimonies that we have, and we tried to cross-reference the information that we obtain from the witnesses. And then Monzer and I will carefully study each room and each wall to see the traces that ISIS left in this building. So in this house, we noticed that there was not much changes in the house itself. We didn't see a structure of a prison that we see in other prisons, because there was war going on. So for example, here there was torture, of course, and we saw also rooms that was a store for weapons, and because the war was ongoing at that time. So in this prison we had three testimonies that helped us understand this prison. Here we are seeing this kind of torture that it was really famous in Deir ez-Zor. And here منذر فيك نعرض الفيديو تبع الشاهد. Here you can see how we built our animation scenes, or this scenes based on the interviews themselves. For example, this witness is explaining the torture that he suffered. So he is trying to explain to us carefully his body movement during the torture, and Monzer then will rebuild the images based on this testimony. اوكي منذر فينا نعرض الانيميشن.
So just for me to add in here, all of this is already published on the website and is meant for everybody else to go through this investigation.
Yeah, so as you can see here, like we carefully built this scene based on the testimony that we had. And also in this prison, we had like 3 testimonies. One of them was in 2014, he was detained in this prison, while the other was in 2015. And this like time gap between the testimonies showed us different different policies in the prison, because at first there was Al-Battar battalion, men who were like controlling the prison. Then different people took over the house and took over the prison. So always like also we used Sasha and Ayman investigation as a background to understand, like to always compare what we are studying inside the prison and what was happening in Deir ez-Zor during that time, to make sure that the stories of the test, like the witnesses, are fitting to the general timeline that we have, or the general understanding of each stage. Since Robin mentioned, for example, there was like 12 days battle, then there was like different events that took place. So we are always like trying to make sure that to make sure that it's accurate. And so this is like in general the first prison. We can move now to Abu Hamam or Halawa prison, which is the second prison. Here, since the battle was over, like the 12 days battle, here like our witnesses was detained in this house between 2015 until 2017. So here we noticed different kind of reasons why people were arrested. It's not related to being fighting in these battles against the regime. Here we saw like we witnessed people being detained because they were like selling tobacco, or if they have like internet, and different kind of crimes. And in this, for example, here we can see a scene. Also, we built it based on the testimonies, because in this prison we had a lot of details about the meals that prisoners took. And because the ISIS at that time, he still or took over all of the markets near the prison, so they were using these supplies to feed the prisoners. So here, like based on this, we know that what they ate and how they were using the space during that time. Here, like if we go to solitary cells, we will see that this prison is more a prison like the compared to Al-Battar. Here, like like ISIS took its time to build the structure more as a prison. And also, like if as you noticed, maybe all the windows are sealed and they are closed. So it's more like it's more organized as a prison compared to Al-Battar. Also, in all of these prisons, we have the investigation room, the judge room, we have like group cells, we have solitary cells. And we always comparing the testimonies and the architecture details that me and Munzer can, after like carefully studying each space, we will be able to see like the uses of each space.
And Noor, does that mean when we found the house in 2020 in this state that nobody has taken it over? So it still looks like this when we found it? Just a second.
Yeah, like they didn't remove the solitary cell. And yeah, and some of these houses weren't used because also people, after ISIS like left the area, they took more time to return. So maybe they return in 2021, for example. Yeah, and in this, like sometimes we have the testimonies inside, like we have the witness inside the building itself. Sometimes if there is any problem, maybe we will show him the 3D tour and he will help us understand the prison better. In this prison, we have different floors. We have the like first floor and the second floor. The second floor was for meant for investigations and torture, while the people stayed in the cells under. Here, I wanted also to mention like briefly about the tools that we use inside the 3D tours. In general, we have, as you can see, we have, of course, the animation. This animation is combined with the voiceover. It's like narrator who is explaining what's happening. Also, like this voiceover, you will see it also in different part of the tour to help you understand or navigate the tour, to know like where to move or what to expect to find. We have also icon, that's information icon. We sometimes provide information about the building itself or the structure. So for example, here, if you press, you will read a little bit more about the uses of the room or different details. We have, of course, also like this option of moving منذر في
Just Noor is coming to us from far away from Syria, so maybe it's a little bit of a
rooms and
yeah. You were just frozen for a second, Noor. All good. Okay.
Yeah, منذر فينا نعرض أبو حمام. Now for the third and the last tour we had, we based this, we built this tour based on 2 testimonies. In this case, it was audio testimonies, not like video testimonies, because people were at this stage afraid of sleeping cells of ISIS, or they weren't comfortable sharing their like faces. So these 2 people were arrested also between 2015 and 2017. It was also like, as you can see here, also we had this like solitary cells. So it was also like more structured as a prison. And we have also like a judge room and a place for torturing the witnesses or the victims. So in general, the tours like has different tools to help the viewer understand more about the details or how we also build it, and to also see the people who are sharing their experience, and to be able to study the place by themselves, the viewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like this is the 3 prisons.
That's about it. Yeah, thank you, Noor, very much. It's very impressive, and feels so very much lifelike, like it is. So even the pickup truck, you could see there is something that is something that the prisoners remembered, right? Because it looks a little out of place, this big truck in the back of this house, but